Now, this project, I spent 30 days digging with just hand tools an impact crater into the land. The intention of this project was to give me space to reckon with what it meant to be human. And to do that, it really necessitated spending a lot of time in that space of what is going on in my mind. And this is a very practical way to deal with humanity, is to really just deal with the raw material of oneself. So if if you can spend time with the raw material of oneself while there is some conceptualizing that goes into that space, ultimately you can come back from an experience like that and really say that you came to know what you are. What follows is a series of stories that stratify, circle, and radiate from a single task: digging a crater using hand tools every day for the length of one lunar cycle. From this point on, every encounter becomes part of the limitations, the lessons, and the gifts that present themselves and ultimately are woven into the earth through the repeated circular ritual of digging. So let's begin. Breaking ground. Day 1, November 4, full moon. When my alarm goes off, it is still mostly dark outside. I'm warm in bed, and it's so cold in the room that the windows are wet with condensation from my breath. I motivate myself out of bed through nervous anticipation alone. I layer up thermals, and over the top, I put my meteorite printed tunic and jacket, still crisp and new, and my straw hat. This has the ceremonial effect of composing me the way that costume does. I walk out into the field with my shovel, mattock, camera, and tripod, all in the bucket of the wheelbarrow, straight towards the huge full moon floating midway above the horizon, sliding rapidly towards the tree line, the sky getting brighter one moment to the next. I break into a run towards the dig site. Before the moon drops out of view, I turn my body towards it, eyes fix as it pales against the brightening sky. I cast my eyes downward and jump onto the step of the shovel, plunging it into the soil, and tilting the handle back, I release grass roots and earth from the ground. Sliding one hand all the way down to the collar and using the other to steady the handle, I lift the mass of soil into the wheelbarrow, its gravity a corporeal confrontation to the weightless dreamland this idea has existed in until this moment. The seriousness of the physical reality of this task begins constricting my chest with a fear bordering on despair. I feel I may have gone too far. I have set myself a task on the frontier of madness. Unsure of what to do with my doubt, I simply continue this action several more times, feeling the wheelbarrow, my courage wavering, and as I do, the earth's shadow shifts around me, the sun breaking the skyline above the hills, soaking my cold face in its blinding energy. I feel honored by the place I find myself, between three enormous celestial bodies whose rotations will define the time limits of the work. The sun determining the length of each day, and the moon cycle announcing the start and end of my performance as the human meteorite. The constellation of these immense clocks shifting every day. I am compelled to honor the presence of these bodies through ritual. Moving intuitively, I lay down the choreography for what becomes a daily gesture of gratitude. Walking clockwise around the interior of the impact site, I chime the blade of the shovel with a stick 30 times, the number of days I have left. In a second circuit, I bow to the moon, just as it disappears from view, and walk to the opposite side. I bow to the sun where it hangs, beaming across hills and fields, numbing my retinas and saturating my body in raw celestial light.
This is a particular time when all of us are either too alone or not alone enough. And it's a good time to think about how and what aloneness means. And when I was about 13, I was crossing the schoolyard, which was uncharacteristically deserted. And I had an epiphany that I was born alone and I will die alone. And for a young person, this was a bit, to chew off. It fell on my head kind of like a brick. But decades later, I came to this phrase by one of my favorite Stoic philosophers, Seneca: I am not alone, I walk with myself. So this act of design, of architecture, of making art, of making experiences on ourselves, I think is a very important one that teaches us about our own humanness. So as architects and designers, poets of space and experience, it's our privilege and our domain to create the context and the conditions in which human beings walk with themselves. I'd like to take us on a path through communing with ourselves, through communing with the senses. And I'd like to prioritize the sense of touch. And you'll see why I do this ahead of the sense of sight. I do this for a couple of reasons. One is that we live in such an oculocentric world. And in the words of Johanni Plasma and one of my favorite essays, The Eyes of the Skin, we can learn a lot from the world of touch. It really is the primal way in which we learn about our surroundings when we're infants. It is how we experience space. And as designers, unless we understand how we feel through our skin, as Michael said, how can we really design for someone else? Form follows feeling has been one of the guiding principles of my practice. And I come to that from a lot of different perspectives. And in architecture, I'll try to show a few examples of the way that this texture plays out. This is an image of a burnt wood art panel next to white rutted paper. And what I wish I could show you also in this mode, which I can't, is the smell. The burnt wood actually had this beautiful smell, and everyone who experienced this actually touched it. And I knew, because I designed a very white space that was a follow-up to this, and I could see the black finger marks everywhere. But the thing that people talked about was touching it, smelling it, and feeling it. And this is the kind of experience that we want people to feel, because we want them to commune with their environment in a way that makes them understand it and lets them know that their environment is also responding to them. And I'd like to show you this image really to just separate, just for argument's sake, the idea of color from texture. This is a very Kubrickian white cubicle where you were learning some information about yourself in our project. And here I use this as an example to really study the fact that texture doesn't need color. You can understand a space and you can understand the difference between different boundaries without it. This image takes me to my next sense that I would like to bring your attention to, which is the sensing of color and of light. This is a project that's located in Miami. It responds to the very bright light of that space. And what this does and illustrates, as you see in this example, is really the importance of how light can move around a space. These are light studies that are very crucial to our exploration of spaces. This was a small space where with a very narrow window, where we really tried to make sure that we could study the way the light moved in the space, which enhanced and informed the shape, the texture, the materials, and therefore the experience of this space. As Nurture says, in interiors in our urban existence, light and color call for more informed watchfulness than eyes have needed for life outside in unhampered nature. And in this image, which I chose actually carefully to make a point about the view, it's not just that in architecture we need to prioritize views in order to commune with nature, but the fact that there's this solitary palm tree that gives you this focus that you look at shows you that there's a boundary in space. And that's actually what you're reading when you look out that way, when you orient yourself, and orienting yourself first to yourself and then to a landscape is extremely important to our understanding of boundaries of space and how we feel. So I'd like to show you the project that Kelly had mentioned. This is an example actually of a readout of how people felt when they walked through 3 different spaces that we designed along with Google, with the International Arts and Minds Lab at Johns Hopkins, and with Muto, the furniture company, to see how people felt in space.
The way that I explain neuroaesthetics is really simple. It's basically how your brain changes on the arts. When you have a heightened aesthetic experience, like a piece of music, a sunrise, things that really elevate your everyday experiences, they change you. They change your biology, they change your mood, they change your emotion. The goal is to see how people resonate with space and to really find out whether what they think they resonate with is what their body is actually resonating with. We respond to the aesthetics of our environments, whether we realize it or not. The band can demonstrate with data from the sensors that actually is happening. Heart activity, respiratory activity, skin temperature, skin conductance. We figure out from the data which room is the one that feels the calmest or the most at ease for people.
So I want to start by sharing a bit of the situation in my life in 2008, between 2008 and 9, when I kind of leading up to moving into the apartment that we live in now. Between 2008 and 2009, I graduated from architecture school and I started a new job, and then I left that job and then moved back to New York. And in that 9-month period, I lived in 9 different places. And so during this period, I really felt connected to being a hermit crab. And oftentimes I felt like I was just moving out of shells as quickly as I had moved in. And finally, in 2009, I moved into the apartment that we live in now, which is a 750 square foot converted loft space in a former textile building in Bushwick. And I felt very relieved to find a place that I could call home. This is actually the photo from the Craigslist ad that I saw for the apartment. And so I started making a lot of different sketches, and I'm going to share some of the early sketches for the apartment here. So in this one, this was a concept sketch for curtain walls inside the space. And I was sort of imagining, starting from the left of the image, if that was closest to the window, could you have a space that is just totally sun drenched, ideal for plants, close to the windows, warm, and then have a sort of soft box like curtain living room right next to it. So the next round of sketches were kind of trying to think through how could a loft be kept open and airy while creating comfortable zones for privacy. And some of the first ideas were making little rooms on wheels. There was another idea for making movable furniture. This was a sketch for a plant Cadillac, is what we called it. And it's a sofa-like thing that you can sit in, and also it houses books and plants all around you, and you can kind of, it's like a giant platform that you can move around the room to follow light, to or not. And then there's also just this constant obsession with small houses and tiny huts and small structures, cabins. And this is something that I've explored for a long time, and imagine I will do for my whole life. So there's something really appealing about little cabins and huts, and I didn't know necessarily what it was beyond the space of being cozy, or maybe being creating a space of fantasy that is also an everyday space. Um, and after doing a lot of studies, I kind of made a lot of models in paper, in foam, in digital form, and in my mind as I sat in the middle of the apartment, and finally landed on a layout that made sense to me. And I had a lot of time throughout the designing and building process where I felt very much like a snail, meandering through ideas very slowly, um, but kind of with the steady drive and confidence that something wonderful was going to happen if I just kept going. I had a lot of time to think about what was important to me about a home, how to grow a home around me from scratch. And what I really wanted was a space that encourages daydreaming, playing, respite, a peaceful oasis that reminded me of nature and the outdoors from a space of comfort and coziness. And so one day when I was sitting in the middle of the empty apartment, I looked over to where I imagined the sleeping area to be, on the left side of the diagonal wall. And I tried to picture a shape that I would be happy to look at every day. And for whatever reason, a house-shaped house is what came to mind. The footprint, it's about 8 by 10, and the footprint is just big enough for a bed, not much else. And there's a pitched roof, which reaches just below the 12-foot ceilings, and it creates this kind of airiness around the structure. Whereas if the walls went all the way up, it would sort of block off the light and the airflow. Inside, the pitched roof makes this kind of lofty, serene feeling, which is very nice for sleeping. And there's also a raised floor, which is inspired by tatami rooms in Taiwan and Japan. And then another thing I think about a lot is portals. So this is a sequence of images that shows this large sliding door. It's a 6-foot door that you can open up to get to the treehouse. And when you close it, it exposes a window, so you still have the option to have light come in without the door being open, or you can open the whole door, and it creates kind of a large window essentially on the other side of the door. And then there's also this feeling of the interior windows within the structures that create views into the living space, and start to create opportunities to have a different kind of flow of light, of air, of conversation, of play. It seems like I really love when people come over and they utilize the windows by popping out and surprising people, or just turning it into like a food stand or whatever it is. But it's a really great opportunity for engagement. So I want to talk a bit about social relationships, and how it's affected the design of the space. And as we all know, especially right now, social relationships have a huge impact on the feeling of a space and how we set ourselves up within a space, and our enjoyment of a space, or not. So shortly after starting Airbnb, I met Adam. And he moved in several months after we met. We began to build the home together. And we started building a lot of things together. One of the first things we built together were these long shelves in our kitchen. It's just like very simple planks of wood, but has a big impact on our life. For mugs and for displaying things, for plants. We built of the long counter in the previous image as well. We built a lot of different lighting solutions. We built stuff in the bathroom. We built a pinup board, a closet, a work surface. This is a table for plants that we built near the window. So then 2 years ago, there was another shift in the social dynamic of the space, which was our daughter was born. And her arrival inspired us to make our home even more comfortable, more welcoming, and safe. And so we imagined spending a lot of time on the floor. And we also imagined crawling and exploring and toddling and falling and hitting heads on corners. And we designed a new dining table that is this cloud table that has this under table landscape that is kind of a cloudy canyon. We imagined spending a lot of time reading. So we built a library under the treehouse, and this is something that, you know, these shelves were, I think, shelves that have been around for a while, but we just sort of made them fit in the new setup. So this is Tove in the treehouse, and then this is just to bring it back, the contrast of where it is. This was taken last year, at the end of last year, and where it was in 2009, 10 years before that. And so I'm going to read the last paragraph of the essay just as closing thoughts about the snail versus the hermit crab. A hermit crab finds a house. A snail grows a home. Perhaps this is the difference between a house and a home. A house is rigid, at times predetermined. A home evolves with its inhabitant. Space is elastic. Perspectives deepen. Needs shift. Resources change over time. Thoughtfully responding to and anticipating change in our lives is an activity that requires patience, curiosity, imagination, resilience, and agency. The activity of growing a home is not easy, nor is it obvious. It cannot be purchased. It is not immediate. A home is a nimble space, made nimble by the willingness of its inhabitants to embrace change. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Jean from Ladies and Gentlemen Studio, and this is Dylan.
Dylan.
And
nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
I think a lot of designers have a hard time defining what they do, and we would probably fit into that same category. And I think what kind of encapsulates everything is the fact that we consider ourselves as design explorers. And so really our goal is to be expansive about the notion of what design can be and should be. So what we really believe in is the idea that objects really exist as a mediary between an intention and an action. When we think about an object and what it really means, there's this intersection between a purpose and an emotion. And that's where we really see that there's actually is a lot of intimacy between us and the things we choose to surround ourselves with. A lot of times what most products that we make or most things that we do start with a point of contemplation. We have been spending a lot of time at the beach lately. We've been spending a lot of time at Rockaway Beach in Brooklyn, which is about 30 minutes from our studio, and really finding it to be a place of power and peace and nature that is really healing at this moment. So, and it really has us rethinking our relationship to environment and inspiration and design and humanity. Here's something that is very essential or very elemental, yet really kind of magical in its own way, and really made us realize that we do have these types of dialogues with materials every day, including sand. These are a few pieces of glass that we found on Rockaway Beach, and they jumped out at us as objects of interest. And every time we take a walk on the beach, we find ourselves with pockets full of things like this that vary from day to day. And so I think that as we put our designer hats on from that, we have to really ask ourselves what about this glass drew us in, and come at that from a point of curiosity and wonderment.
Yeah, so from here, I'll talk about sort of that next phase of us observing and trying to understand each other. So I'm gonna just show like a little video of sort of our shelf that we really value. It's a shelving system from Bitsu that's become one of our like object sanctuary, and a place that is like a three-dimensional inspirational board for us to hold a lot of these materials that we've found or experiment with and things like that. Okay.
And just sort of letting whatever that object is exist first on its own, and then in conjunction with other things that we've found to be attractive and compelling. So that's kind of what you see here, gene mixing and matching. But it really becomes sort of this opportunity for that object to be celebrated for what it is, and not just where it came from.
And then from there, we usually start with little fragments and start to kind of look at it from like a purely on its own, and slowly sort of mix and match and build upon. And
at that point, it really becomes a collaboration and like a sort of a duet between us and the material. And in that, like, we sort of reveal these ideal pairings where there's like a moment of wonderment, a possibility for something to be functional and meaningful to someone. And it kind of becomes this evolutionary process of discovery that isn't really planned, but it happens by way of this sort of rigorous process. And so many times that process alone, with a little bit of creativity, leads to products themselves. And so we have a couple examples of that here, products that have come from glass experimentation specifically. And here's a series called Casimir, where we use these textured architectural glasses together in concert to create these moments where the textures and the light and the color and qualities of the glass overlap in these really magical ways, and also interact with the environment in magical ways as a this happened from us playing with samples of glass we had around the studio. And all that ends up in really beautiful products, but it kind of circles back around to this notion of constantly improving and reflecting upon what we're exploring and understanding it more deeply over time. This really becomes a moment to think about, how material transforms into an object, and what's lost and what can be sort of rediscovered in that process. So for this project, we took Fuji products and juxtaposed them next to beautiful moments of origin materials or parts of the process that really sort of bring out the magic in something that is really an everyday product.
Yeah. So we categorize the different types of objects they have, which is paper, glass, ceramic versus wood and metal. And each of them, it's about speaking the spirit of its materiality.
And it became a really great moment to reflect on all these ideas of like, what's the origins of things and what is the true nature of the things we use every day. And I think that in a lot of ways that takes us full circle back to the beach right now, and this idea of kind of continually wandering and exploring and contemplating, and that there's a continuum, and that we've really only scratched the surface in terms of what we've explored. So I think that we're really looking forward to this new chapter where we can use these new surroundings and a new environment to see where the next level of exploration will take us.